a mother's diet so very, very important while she is breastfeeding? Guys, I'm back answering many of those commonly asked questions that I get in practice, particularly around that age group of kids 0 to 12 months. And this regarding mum's diets is by far one of the most common conversations I'm having early on when taking a little one, because mum's diet has such a massive indicator onto the health and happiness of little gremlin. Now, there are some very, very obvious ones that any mother will know about. Obviously, any mother that is breastfeeding, alcohol is a no-no. That's basic, that's very, very common knowledge. However, there is a real group of foods that seems to fly under the radar of common knowledge, or it seems to be a little bit controversial, associated with its impact on kiddos. So we're going to hit the main three. We're going to talk about some of their consequences and the implications if we don't make some of these changes. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a few indicators that may be a suggestion that your child is having a little bit of a difficulty with one of these foods. So the three most common food groups in particular that seem to be irritating to a child under the age of 12 months, particularly the breastfed child, will be mum consuming dairy, mum consuming gluten, and mum consuming caffeine. So by far out of those three, the most common one that I'm talking about with mothers is dairy. Now, this is not a topic of conversation around lactose. I'm not suggesting there's a lactose intolerance or anything like that. What we've come to understand over more recent years is it's actually the cow's milk protein that seems to be an irritant to the digestive system of a little one. Now, this particularly presents itself to me as that child that is particularly irritated, very, very unsettled when trying to feed, and they are most commonly going to have either particularly explosive poos, or they're going to have a real bad situation with reflux and regurgitation. So these kids will very commonly look like their eyes are very sunken back into their skull. They're not going to sleep. They are basically going to be an all-round, very irritated, very pissed off kid. Gluten certainly fits the same conversation. It is by far significantly less common than dairy as far as being an irritant. It particularly has a far more common association with the digestive system. Obviously, we've got things such as celiac disease, which has a very heavily genetic component to it. So I'm not suggesting a child who may be a little bit sensitive to gluten as a young one is going to be going down the path of celiac disease. I'm simply suggesting that things such as dairy and gluten in particular are just an irritation to a little, very, very underdeveloped digestive system that at this stage is not ready for those types of foods. The final one is caffeine. Now, this seems to be a little bit on the very, very obvious side and a little bit on the very, very hidden side. A lot of mums don't fully comprehend the amount of caffeine that sneaks into their diet. Now, they may be reducing their coffee consumption. They may be reducing their Coca-Cola consumption. Please don't drink that horrible stuff. But where they fail to recognize that caffeine is sneaking is through some of their herbal teas. It does tend to irritate a child, much like with a human. Caffeine is a stimulant. So if you really want to give a 3-month child a stimulant, then please go ahead, drink an espresso, then breastfeed, and let me know how that works out for you. So like I've already touched on, some of the consequences of these sorts of things is it is an irritation to a child, and it makes their early development of both their nervous system, their digestive system, and ultimately their entire body just a little bit more challenging than it needs to be. As I mentioned, it commonly presents to me as the highly irritated, highly unsettled child, particularly will have one end of the digestive system probably firing off, so it's either going to be the poos or particularly some vomiting and regurgitation associated with feeding. That may be at various intervals with the feeds themselves. So guys, they are very, very easy to remove from your diet. Mums, I strongly encourage you to do so. If I was going to pick on one of those three, by far I'm going to be picking on dairy as the most common culprit. I'm not suggesting we're dealing with allergies here. I'm just suggesting we're dealing with something that doesn't need to be in the child's digestive system. It's not required in their diet at this age, and it just makes their development more difficult than it needs to be. So take those out of the diet. You need to have them out of your diet for anywhere up to probably 6 weeks to make sure you really clean both yourself, your breast milk, and then ultimately your child's digestive system out of those products. Watch them get happier and healthier. and I hope you're all keeping very warm and safe at this time of chaos.